Excellent. All right. So what are you actually going to learn? Does anyone get this reference? A few nods again. Okay. I'll try and ask some younger people about popular cultural reference for today. This is a TV show called The X-Files. It was big when I was your age. Wow, feeling old. Excellent, great. And the red doesn't really show, but you'll see I've made a valiant effort to put plural there. All right, the truths are out there. This is what we're going for. Stay with me, it's going to be a fun semester. All right, how do we identify truth? The 10 steps that are there, you're going to become very familiar with. Every week, I'm going to bang on about these 10 steps. Because what we're going to be doing is different points are going to be what we focus on a particular week. So, in the social sciences, the first thing we do, just as in the natural sciences, is we identify a problem. Gee, that's interesting. I wonder what that means. Or, oh, that's odd. I wonder why it happens that way. Yeah, stagflation. Oh, that says that can't happen. Oh, wow, it did. Okay, all that sort of stuff. So we've got to have a look and we've got to identify that problem. As I said before, the next thing we do is we go to, well, what already exists? Has this problem already been looked at? Has somebody written something about it? Has somebody already researched this? How did they research it? What did they do? All right. Then we're going to establish our ontology and our epistemology. Remember, that's a fancy way of saying, are we looking for truth or truths? And how are we looking at that? I don't want to say too much about epistemology because next week it's the focus. So next week we're going to be looking at step 3 in detail. Methodology and methods. Methodology and methods are not the same thing. Okay? In this unit, we tend to conflate them a little bit. We tend to merge them a bit. But they aren't the same thing. So method is data. Methodology is information. If we return to that tiered process. Okay, then we're going to make a plan. It's weird that making a plan is step 5. But it's not really step 5. It could be step 2. But we'll talk about that on the week where we do making a plan. All right? Ethics. Ethics are a heap of fun. We focus on them on week 4, I think. Why do we have ethics? So think about what ethics actually means to you and all that sort of stuff. You'll notice that the emphasis that I've put on for that week is whether or not ethics should actually exist at all for research. You know, does it really get in the way of truth? Don't know. Interesting question. And we don't have to use ethics for all research, right? So for my thesis, I don't need ethics clearance because I'm looking at documents that are in the public domain. Doesn't need ethics. Documents are already written. Don't care. All right? Can't find the documents at the moment, but they exist. It's fine. Then we get the data. How do we get the data? Do we interview? Do we use ethnography? Blah, blah, blah. How do we get that data? Then we analyse it. We align our results, because I can tell you right now, your results may not actually line up with what you expected, because we're dealing with people. There is nothing worse than going out there and saying, this is my interview question, this is my interview idea, this is the problem I'm looking at. Then you go out there and you interview people only to find that they don't tell you anything that is useful to you at all. Okay, it's happened to me and a collaborator that I have. So what happened was we had this question, we interview people, we go, come back, we look at the data, and we sat there for 3 hours going, oh. And then after 3 hours, we were like, right, well, we will throw that research question out, and we'll develop a new research question, which is what we did. So we actually went all the way back up to step 1. And then we tell the world. And we can tell the world in lots of different ways. Okay, and that's week 9. So basically, this whole unit is going to be running you through those 10 steps. How do we do them? How do we get there? But they don't actually happen in this order. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. All right? So it's also about teaching you the degree of flexibility in not having them happen in that order and being comfortable with that. So this unit is also about teaching you to be comfortable with change and adaptability and all that sort of stuff. Because we're dealing with people, and people never do what you think they're going to do. Ever. All right? Okay, as I said earlier, there's this whole concept about research and this inaccessibility of it. One of the things that I find most frustrating with social scientists is this idea that if I talk really big words and sound really intelligent, then everybody will believe me. And it's like, well, but I don't understand you. So what I want to do is actually skill you up in some of what we call the meta-language, the big language around research. So already we've talked about ontology and epistemology. I've already talked about methods and methodology. So method is actually interviewing got me the data, but my methodology was narrative analysis because I was looking at the narrative, the story in those interviews. Or I was doing critical discourse on that interview transcript. So my methodology is critical discourse. So I'm looking at counting how many times a certain word was used and what that actually means in the context of society. Yeah? Validity. Is your research valid? Okay, what is that, you know, is it valid for society? Does it have meaning to society? Is your data valid? Does it have integrity? Okay, reliability. The textbook talks about reliability. One of my problems with the word with reliability in the social sciences is that we don't have it. Anyone who says my research is reliable in the social sciences is not telling you the truth. Reliable means it can be repeated. So if I drop an apple and it falls, you can drop an apple and it will fall. That means it's reliable data. You and I can do exactly the same thing. We can drop the same apple from the same distance and get the same outcome. In the social sciences, if I interview you today with one set of questions and then I interview you tomorrow with the same set of questions, you're going to give me different answers. First off, because you've already answered me. Second off, it's a different day. So today you're calm, cool, relaxed, it's week one, it's fine, I'm chill, I've had my coffee. Tomorrow I'm cranky as, I've just got a parking ticket, really not into this. You're going to give me different answers. Let alone if you repeat the same social experiment 10 years apart. You will get different answers. If you've ever seen a show called 7 Up, that's really quite an interesting social experiment, really. You know, because they're interviewed 7 years apart. But they're not really asked the same questions. Because what you ask a 7-year-old is different from what you ask a 21-year-old. So that's kind of interesting research. Because it gives us certain truths, but I'm not sure what those truths are in the meaning. Objectivity. This is an interesting one in the social sciences because lots of people will talk about how I'm objective. You know, in my social science research, I'm objective, I'm analysing words, I'm doing discourse analysis, I'm counting how many times blue chair was in this document. Therefore, I'm being objective. But why did you choose blue chair? What made you make that choice? Okay, what was it about you that was interested in the truth of blue chairs in that document? What was your bias? What was your leaning? I don't think you can be objective in any research, including the natural sciences. This is my personal position. Because if a natural scientist is looking at something to do with I know nothing about physics, so roll with it. They're looking at something in physics, right? Well, I'm objective because I'm a natural scientist and I'm doing experiments in a lab. Right? Okay, good for you. But what made you choose that part of physics? Why are you looking for that particular thing at that particular moment in those particular circumstances? What is it that got you to that point? Yes, the act of the experiment is objective because you can't sway it one way or the other. But what led you to make those choices is not objective at all. It's completely subjective. All right? I'm happy to have that discussion because, you know, I'm kind of a voice in the wilderness about that. Because natural scientists will tell you they are objective. And I will tell you the amount of lying that can go on in some natural science studies these days is pretty impressive. If you're doing psychology, there are some really interesting natural science experiments going on in psychology. So just be conscious of the objectivity. And then reflexivity. I've spoken about reflexivity. It's the ability to look at you and what you're doing in your research. How are you changing your research? If you're a man researching women things, well, how does your manness influence your perspective of womanness? And vice versa, if you're a woman doing man research, how does your womanness... Womanness and manness aren't words, are they? Anyway, but you know what I'm saying, right? You're with me. How do you influence that? What is your perspective of that? How are you changing your data? How are you changing your analysis? Because this is social science. This is what you're doing inside your research. Concepts, bias, that's an obvious one. So, you know, if you think blue chairs are the best thing in the world, then obviously you're going to have a complete bias and it's going to taint all the data that you collect. So you need to be conscious of that. Planning. So we're going to talk a whole week about planning and how it works and why we do it and how it never does what you think it's going to do. Benefice. Benefice is the do no harm and do good, really. So benefice is an ethics concept and it's about actually being good about your research. So malefice is do no harm and benefice is actually do good. All right? So as social scientists, we're interviewing people or we're observing people or we're engaging with people, right? So we can actually do a lot of harm, and I'll talk about that in the ethics week. Ethics is obviously ethics. And in research, it's not just the capital E ethics and the ethics committees and things like that. It's actually the small e ethics, your ethics. Because once you get clearance from the ethics committee and you start interviewing somebody, it's your personal ethical stance that changes the interview. All right? If someone starts to get really angry in the interview, what does your ethical position mean? What will you do with that data? Okay? It's a really important concept to think about. And deviance. Deviance is always fun. Deviance in research is the idea that 90 people that you interviewed said, you know, blue chairs are awesome, and then the 91st person said red chair is good. Well, why have I got 90 over here and one person over here? We call it deviant data. It's data that is deviant away from the bulk of your data. And as social scientists, we use that data because that data is interesting. The natural sciences can quite often just ignore it, and do. We call it the data dump. All right? And we dump data. If you interview somebody, you'll find this in Assessment D. When you interview people, you'll have a whole transcript, and you're not going to use all of it. You're going to use this much of it, which means you're dumping the rest of it. So what does that actually mean in relation to your research? What does that mean in relation to your truth? Because when you get your transcript, you're picking the truth that you want to talk about. You're picking the truth that you want to engage with. Well, does that mean everything else is invalid? To come back to this valid word. Yeah? So it's that sort of concept there. So this is some of the meta-language we're going to be using, some of the concepts I want you to become familiar with and how we move forward with that. Good-o. All right. The textbook talks about this quant and qual. I hate it with a passion. This is why I use the terms natural science and social science. Quant and qual for me is a dead issue. Quant means numbers, quantity. Yep. Qualitative means quality. No-brainer, really. This is the linguistic stuff I'm talking about, right? The language. We have to understand language. We actually become linguists to a certain degree. We have to understand the language and the roots of it. Quantitative merely tells us how big the problem is. Okay? How many people are involved? How many buildings are involved? You know, that sort of stuff. What are people's preferences? How many people have iPhones? How many people have Android? Tells us numbers. How big is the problem? What's the magnitude? All right? The qualitative tells us why somebody has an iPhone over an Android, or vice versa. Or it tells us how they got the iPhone over the Android. Okay? So we need to make sure the textbook talks that one's better than the other, blah, blah, blah. I'm mixed methods. I use both. Because I think numbers are useful. It's important to understand how big a problem is. It tells you something. All right? But for me in the social sciences, it's what we call the thick description, the richness, the whys, the hows. Because that's, for me as a social scientist, is where the interesting stuff is. That's where it's happening. So it is a great debate, and you will have, and in fact there are journals who will not publish qualitative work. All right, so there are journals out there, and in fact I'm about to go to a journal, my colleague and I have done qualitative research, and the chances of us getting published in that journal is pretty small. But we're going to that journal for a particular reason, and we're going to give it a crack. Because it's a quantitative journal. It usually only publishes surveys and metrics and stuff. I don't know maths. Okay? There are other journals that won't publish quantitative stuff. So it is a real thing in research. There is a real divide about whether or not one is better than the other. The natural sciences tend to be quantitative. How many people have cancer? How many people got this treatment? How many people got the placebo? What value of treatment did they get? What was the changes in their longevity? You know, it's all numbers, right? Whereas the social sciences going, well, how did the people on the placebo feel? Did they feel better or worse than the people who were on the treatment? Did they engage differently with their day-to-day existence? Those sorts of questions. See the difference? Yeah. Okay, so just be conscious it is a great debate. It's just not a debate that I think is worth having anymore. I think the ship has sailed. I think mixed methods is the way to go. Personal position, completely biased. Okay? All right? But that's just, it's one of the biggest failings, I think, with the textbook. There are a few problems with the textbook, but I think it's the biggest failing.